The plague matter lay in John G. Lake's hand, and the danger that had entered countless homes did not enter him. In Spokane, Washington, during the 1910 outbreak, Lake reported that he handled what others feared, served people marked by sickness, and remained protected. His testimony did not describe a distant God watching from safety. It described the Holy Spirit as living power, present in the body, stronger than the death surrounding him. Spokane carried the weight of a city under threat. The plague was not an idea or a rumor. It was a relentless reality pressing against families, streets, and places of service. Every act of care demanded courage. Every visitor who crossed a threshold could bring suffering with them. In that atmosphere, compassion itself became costly, and the healing ministry associated with John G. Lake stood where fear and faith met face to face. Lake had known sorrow before Spokane. Loss had carved deep chambers into his life, and those wounds shaped the way he looked upon the afflicted. He was not approaching suffering as a stranger. He understood the silence left by death, the questions carried by survivors, and the helplessness that rises when human strength reaches its limit. Yet he continued toward the sick, believing that divine mercy could move through willing hands. The healing rooms became a refuge within the crisis. People came seeking prayer, comfort, and relief while the plague seemed to tighten its grip. There was no promise that the hour would be easy. The ministry stood beneath the pressure of real illness and real danger. Still, the rooms became a place where fear was not given the final word, and where the presence of the Holy Spirit was expected to meet human need. Lake's reported protection emerged in the midst of service, not isolation. He told of handling plague matter and observing that it could not live in the presence of the life he believed was flowing through him. The claim was extraordinary because the setting was ordinary in the most painful sense. The threat was close. The work was physical. The people were vulnerable. His faith became a point of contact between unseen grace and visible danger. What happens when a person stands before death and refuses to believe that death is sovereign? The question reached beyond Lake's own safety. It touched the character of his ministry. Protection, as he understood it, was not permission to avoid the suffering of others. It was strength to enter that suffering without surrendering to it. The encounter changed courage from an emotion into an act of obedience. The city outside the healing rooms continued beneath a heavy shadow. Families waited for signs of recovery. Caregivers carried burdens that could not be measured by words. The sick needed more than arguments. They needed presence. Lake's testimony gained its force from this pressure. He was not speaking about divine protection as an abstract blessing. He was speaking from the edge of a public emergency, where every decision carried consequence. Within that atmosphere, prayer became more than a request for relief. It became an expression of trust that the Holy Spirit was not confined by walls, symptoms, or the terror of an epidemic. The healing rooms offered a setting where bodies were brought into the light, where anguish could be spoken, and where believers gathered around the conviction that God remained active amid devastation. The reported event also revealed the cost of ministry. To serve the sick meant accepting proximity to what others fled. It meant allowing compassion to become stronger than self-preservation. Lake's protection, as he presented it, did not make him indifferent to danger. It made him willing to approach danger with a deeper allegiance. His confidence was not rooted in personal power, but in divine life received and entrusted for service. The atmosphere shifted from dread to wonder. The plague still represented death, but it no longer appeared to Lake as an absolute ruler. In his testimony, the Holy Spirit stood as a living presence that could preserve a servant while that servant touched the evidence of disease. The meaning was not merely that one man escaped harm. The meaning was that divine life could confront the place where human life seemed most threatened. That conviction carried a solemn responsibility. If protection was given, it was given for love. If strength was supplied, it was supplied for the wounded. The healing rooms were not presented as a theater for spectacle. They were a place of burden, prayer, and mercy. Every person who entered brought a story that mattered before God. Every act of service declared that the afflicted were not abandoned. The testimony of John G. Lake endured because it joined spiritual confidence to public compassion. He did not describe faith as retreating from the world. He described faith entering the world's anguish with open hands. In Spokane, the language of divine protection was inseparable from the work of healing. The claim became credible to believers through the life it produced: courage, service, endurance, and a refusal to turn away. A mystery remains at the heart of such testimony. Why does divine power sometimes appear through dramatic preservation, while other prayers pass through seasons of grief? the question does not erase the witness Lake gave. Instead, it deepens the reverence surrounding it. The miraculous is not a mechanism controlled by human demand. It is an encounter with the living God, whose presence calls people to trust, serve, and remain faithful amid uncertainty. For Lake, the plague did not become a story of personal triumph alone. It became part of a larger calling. The man who had known sorrow now stood among the suffering with a renewed understanding of spiritual responsibility. His past did not disappear, but it was gathered into a purpose. What had once wounded him became part of the compassion with which he approached others. The healing rooms also changed the emotional geography of Spokane. Fear had made the city feel closed, but ministry created a place of welcome. People could come carrying weakness and encounter believers who did not treat them as burdens. Prayer restored dignity before any physical change could be seen. In that room, the afflicted were not reduced to symptoms. They were received as souls bearing the image of God. The reported protection of Lake became a sign to those around him because it was connected to practical love. The supernatural claim was never separated from human touch, patient attention, and the willingness to stand near suffering. This is where the testimony becomes more than a remarkable episode. It becomes a portrait of faith made visible through service, with the Holy Spirit turning conviction into action. The city's crisis exposed the limits of human control. No one could command the plague to obey a timetable. No one could guarantee an uncomplicated path through the danger. Yet the healing ministry declared that limitation was not the same as abandonment. Divine presence could enter the narrowest room, strengthen the trembling heart, and kindle hope where circumstances offered very little ground for it. As the testimony moved beyond Spokane, its influence traveled through Pentecostal healing history. Believers remembered Lake not only for what he reported touching, but for what his account represented. It represented a faith willing to confront disease without worshipping fear, a ministry that valued the suffering, and a conviction that the life of the Holy Spirit was more than language spoken in comfort. The transformation was inward as well as public. Protection did not simply preserve Lake from infection as he understood it. It altered his relationship with danger. He could look upon the threat and still recognize the presence of God. That kind of courage is not loud confidence. It is a settled peace formed when the soul discovers that obedience can be stronger than instinct. The same transformation reached those who heard him. His testimony invited listeners to imagine faith not as escape, but as consecrated presence. It called them to ask whether compassion could become a spiritual discipline, whether prayer could remain alive under pressure, and whether the Holy Spirit could make ordinary people steadfast in extraordinary circumstances. There is a difference between claiming immunity and receiving courage. Lake's story, as remembered by believers, rested on the second reality. He entered a dangerous environment because people needed help. The report of protection was therefore bound to a purpose greater than survival. It testified that divine strength could sustain a servant while that servant carried mercy into a place where fear had already begun to govern the human heart. The memory of Spokane carries this tension with sacred weight. The plague was real, and the suffering was real. So was the faith that rose within that darkness. The healing rooms did not erase the seriousness of the crisis. They revealed another reality within it, one in which prayer, courage, and compassion became channels through which people encountered hope. What did those rooms say to a frightened city? They said that illness could not define the whole story. They said that the vulnerable deserved presence, not abandonment. They said that the people of God could become steady when the surrounding world was shaken. Above all, they proclaimed that the Holy Spirit was not a memory from another age, but a divine presence capable of strengthening lives in the hour of need. Lake's account continues to challenge the comfortable distance between belief and behavior. It is easy to speak of faith when danger is far away. It is different to walk toward the suffering, to touch what others fear, and to remain attentive to the wounded. His testimony placed that challenge before every listener. Spiritual conviction must eventually become a choice, and that choice is often revealed through service. The deepest legacy was not the preservation of one body. It was the awakening of many hearts to the possibility of holy courage. Some heard the story and found permission to pray with greater expectancy. Others discovered that compassion could survive where fear had seemed inevitable. The account became a spiritual inheritance, passed from one generation to another, as evidence of what believers understood to be divine protection. In the silence after the crisis, Spokane could remember more than the plague. It could remember people who opened their lives to the afflicted. It could remember healing rooms filled with prayer. It could remember John G. Lake's reported encounter with danger and his conviction that the life of the Holy Spirit was present within him. Such memories do not glorify the crisis. They honor the grace that met people inside it. The question finally turns toward us. When suffering appears at the threshold, what will govern the heart? Fear, or the knowledge that divine love still calls us near? Lake's testimony does not invite reckless pride. It calls for humility, courage, and compassion under the authority of God. Protection, in its highest meaning, is not merely being spared. It is being preserved for love, strengthened for service, and kept faithful when the world is trembling. In 1910, amid the plague in Spokane, Washington, John G. Lake reported a protection that believers recognized as supernatural. His healing rooms became a witness to prayer under pressure. His account became a testimony of divine life confronting the shadow of disease. And the lasting message remains clear. When the Holy Spirit moves through a surrendered life, even a place marked by fear can become a place where mercy stands, hope rises, and courage bears witness. If this testimony touched your faith, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it.